The story begins on the shores of Komoda Beach, where the sand is white and the ocean is a deep, dark blue. This is the first day of the end of the old world, a place where the honor of the samurai meets the fire of a new kind of enemy. This part of the history is a story of the first spark, a realization that a storm is coming that cannot be stopped with a simple bow or a sharp blade. The atmosphere here is cold, windy, and tense, and the ground beneath the hooves of the horses is a soft, shifting sand that feels like it is already trying to bury the past. The air tastes of salt, sea foam, and the sharp, metallic scent of iron armor. The sound of the world is a low and constant roar, the sound of the waves hitting the beach like a warning, making the entire island feel like a colossal, waiting shield. Lord Jin Sakai stands with his uncle, Lord Shimura, looking out at the black ships on the horizon, realizing that in the age of the invasion, the danger is the belief that the rules of the past will protect you in the future. As the sun begins to set, turning the sky into a bruised purple and orange, the atmosphere shifts to one of sudden violence. The Mongol fleet arrives not with words, but with whistling arrows and explosive fire, a realization that the enemy does not care for the traditions of the Bushido. This is the era of the shattered line, where the atmosphere is one of brutal impacts and desperate courage. You see the way the Mongols move not in lines, but in a swarm that covers the beach like a black tide. This part of the history is a story of the steel against the flame, a realization that the samurai are walking into a trap made of gunpowder and hate. The sound of the horses screaming in the smoke is a high and piercing note, a noise that breaks the rhythm of the ocean. Lord Jin moves with a sturdy and measured might, his katana held high as he charges into the fire, feeling the searing heat of the arrows and the steady vibration of the earth beneath him, a feeling of total and grounded determination. Deep within the center of the battlefield, the atmosphere becomes cramped and smothering. The smoke from the Mongol firepots is so thick that Jin can barely see the face of the man next to him. This is the trial of the blind strike, where the atmosphere becomes one of muffled screams and sudden shadows. The samurai find that their heavy armor is a burden in the soft sand, a realization that the island itself is struggling to hold them up. The sound of the swords clashing is a harsh and grating snap, making the beach feel like the inside of a metal box. This part of the history is a realization that to survive the beach, they must fight like the wind through the chaos. He feels the sticky heat of the blood on his gauntlets and the constant pressure of the smoke against his chest, a feeling of total and grounded endurance. At the edge of the dunes, where the tall grass meets the sand, Jin encounters a Mongol commander, a man encased in thick furs and heavy iron, who wields a shield that reflects the orange light of the burning ships. The fight is a story of the honor against the wall. The atmosphere is violent, loud, and unyielding, as the commander pushes Jin back with a force that feels like a falling tree. This is the trial of the first defeat, where the atmosphere becomes one of hard impacts and growing dread. Jin strikes again and again, But the shield does not break, a realization that the enemy has built a defense for every move he knows. The sound of the shield hitting the sand is a deep and final thud, making the air feel like it is filled with the weight of a mountain. When Jin is finally struck down, falling into the cold water of the tide, the atmosphere shifts to a heavy and silent calm, a realization that the beach is now a graveyard for the old ways. Leaving the beach in a blur of pain and darkness, the journey leads to the edge of the golden forest, where Jin is found by a woman named Yuna. The atmosphere is vast, quiet, and golden, a realization that the island is still beautiful even as it burns. This part of the history is a story of the hidden path, where the atmosphere is one of secret healing and silent shadows. You see the way the yellow leaves of the ginkgo trees fall like gold coins, covering the wounds of the warrior. The air is cool and carries the taste of rain and damp earth. The sound of the wind through the leaves is a low and constant sigh, signaling that the spirit of Tsushima is a place that refuses to die. The walk through the ruins of the village is a story of the broken home. You encounter the burnt remains of the houses where the farmers once lived, their tools now rusted and abandoned in the dirt. This is a moment of raw and grounded grief. The atmosphere is somber and still, a realization that the invasion is not just a battle for a beach, but a battle for the soul of every person on the island. This part of the history is a story of the tarnished blade, where Jin must decide if he will remain a samurai or become something else, something the Mongols will fear. The sound of his boots on the charred wood is a sharp and respectful click, making Jin feel solid and heavy in a world that is losing its light. He moves with a sturdy and balanced resolve, his hand touching the hilt of his father's sword, realizing that the shadow is sometimes the only way to reach the light. Deep in the heart of the forest camp, the final trial of the first part takes place as Jin sits by a small and secret fire with Yuna. The atmosphere is intimate, cold, and tense, a realization that they are the only two people left who are willing to fight back. This is a story of the sovereignty of the shared secret, where they talk about the legend of the ghost and how a single man can change the fate of 1,000. The conversation is a moment of grounded humanity, as they realize that honor is a luxury they can no longer afford if they want to save Lord Shimura. The sound of a Mongol horn blowing in the distance is a lonely and deep note, signaling that the true enemy is the fear that tells you to give up. The experience of the fall of Komoda Beach ends with Jin standing on a high cliff, looking back at the black smoke rising from the shore. The white of the sand has led to a sovereignty of the dark forest. He carries the weight of the fallen samurai's honor and the silence of the beach. The atmosphere is one of quiet and hardened resolve, a realization that the path to victory is now a path of the ghost. The focus would now shift to the recruitment of allies, as the history prepared to follow the trail of the wind into a world of hidden camps, sharpened arrows, and the first strikes of a shadow warrior. The final legacy of the first part of the Ghost of Tsushima is a story of the strength in the broken blade. You have seen the warrior walk through the fire and the sand to find the spark within his own spirit. You have felt the sting of the salt and the weight of the loss. As the golden glow of the forest fades into the evening shadows and the first red star of the invasion appears on the horizon, you feel a sense of simple and sacred purpose. The story of Jin Sakai finds its first and grounded resolution in the choice to fight, leaving behind the world of the sun for a world of shadows, secrets, and a journey that is about to begin. The journey moves away from the golden leaves of the forest and begins to climb toward the rugged, mist-covered heights of Hiyoshi. This is the path to the Archer's Peak, a place where the air is thin and the world is made of steep stone and ancient wood. This part of the history is a story of the silent teacher, a realization that to defeat an enemy that fights without rules, one must learn the art of the eagle and the wind. The atmosphere here is cool, damp, and sharp, and the ground beneath Jin's boots is a winding mountain trail of gray rock and tangled roots that feel like they are trying to pull him back down. The air tastes of cedar, wet moss, and the faint, sulphurous scent of the hidden hot springs below. The sound of the world is a high and whistling chord, the sound of the mountain wind moving through the narrow canyons, making the entire peak feel like a colossal, waiting archer. Jin leads himself up the twisting stairs of the dojo, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword to keep it from clanking against the stone, realizing that in the heights, the danger is the arrow you never hear coming. As Jin reaches the training grounds of Sensei Ishikawa, the atmosphere shifts to one of strict discipline and lingering regret. He finds the dojo empty and bloodied, the targets splintered, and the floor covered in the black-feathered arrows of the Mongol invaders. This is the era of the fallen master, where the atmosphere is one of shattered peace and hidden shame. You see the way the shadows of the tall bamboo trees move across the wooden floors, looking like the bars of a cage. This part of the history is a story of the broken bow, a realization that even the greatest warriors can be betrayed by their own students. The sound of a single string snapping in the wind is a sharp and dry note, a noise that signals the end of the old harmony. Jin moves with a sturdy and measured might, his eyes tracking the footprints in the mud that lead away from the dojo and into the dense thicket of the Hiyoshi Springs. He feels the steady chill of the mountain mist and the raw weight of the silence in the air, a feeling of total and grounded preparation. Deep within the thicket of the hidden spring, the atmosphere becomes cramped and watchful. Jin finds Sensei Ishikawa waiting in the shadows, his eyes as sharp as the flint of his arrows. This is the trial of the hidden intent, where the atmosphere becomes one of vigilance and mutual suspicion. The warriors find that the forest here is so dense that the light of the sun is filtered into a dim green haze, making it impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. The sound of a twig snapping under a Mongol scout's boot is a harsh and grating snap, making the forest feel like the inside of a living trap. This part of the history is a realization that to survive the peak, Jin must learn to see without looking. He feels the steady pulse in the fingertips and the constant pressure of the fog against his chest, a feeling of total and grounded focus. At the edge of a small, rocky clearing where the waterfall hits the pool, the group encounters a Mongol raiding party, a group of scouts with light bows and curved daggers who move with a fast and skittish energy. The fight is a story of the blade against the arrow. The atmosphere is violent, fast, and sudden, as Ishikawa lets loose a volley of arrows that hiss through the air like angry snakes, while Jin charges the scouts who try to find cover in the rocks. This is the trial of the first ambush, where the atmosphere becomes one of rapid impacts and sharp reflexes. Jin must move with a brutal and direct power, his sword cutting through the Mongol leather with a sound like stone hitting meat. The sound of the arrows hitting the trees is a sharp and sizzling thud, making the air feel like it is filled with the sting of the hornet. When the scouts finally lie still in the ferns, the atmosphere shifts to a heavy and misted stillness, a realization that the mountain is a place of sudden deaths. Leaving the clearing, the journey leads to the edge of the lookout point, where the entire valley of Hiyoshi is visible below. The atmosphere is vast, gray, and terrible, as Jin sees the smoke rising from the local village where the Mongols have taken the people as prisoners. This part of the history is a story of the weight of the valley, where the atmosphere is one of responsibility and impending fire. You see the way the Mongol banners fly over the peaceful rooftops, their red fabric looking like a stain on the green landscape. The air is cool and carries the taste of charcoal and wet grass. The sound of the river rushing below is a deep and constant roar, signaling that the flow of the island is being choked by the hand of the invader. The walk through the old bamboo grove is a story of the fatting student. Ishikawa tells Jin of Tamo, the student who turned her back on her people to join the Mongols, teaching them the sacred ways of the Japanese bow. This is a moment of raw and betrayed grief. The atmosphere is somber and still, a realization that the enemy is now using their own history against them. This part of the history is a story of the twisted branch, where Jin must learn that some trees must be cut down to save the forest. The sound of their boots on the hollow bamboo is a sharp and ringing click, making Jin feel solid and heavy in a world made of light wood and lies. He moves with a sturdy and balanced power, his hand checking the tension of his own bowstring, realizing that the way of the warrior is often a lonely and uphill path. Deep in the heart of the mountain camp, the final trial of the second part takes place as Jin and Ishikawa huddle together in a small and elevated cave overlooking the Mongol camp. The atmosphere is intimate, cold, and tense, a realization that they are the only ones who can stop the arrows from falling on the innocents below. This is a story of the sovereignty of the first arrow, where they wait for the perfect moment to strike at the commander. The conversation is a moment of grounded humanity as they talk about the simple wooden flutes they used to play and how the music of the island has been replaced by the music of war. The sound of a Mongol drum beating in the valley is a low and constant throb, signaling that the true enemy is the rhythm of a machine that never stops. The experience at the Archer's Peak ends with Jin standing at the edge of the dojo, looking toward the next region, the Forge of Komatsu. The gray of the stone has led to a sovereignty of the black iron. He carries the weight of the sensei's bow and the silence of the heights. The atmosphere is one of quiet and hardened resolve, a realization that the path to the ghost is now a path of the master's shadow. The focus would now shift to the fire and the hammer, as the history prepared to follow the trail of the steel into a world of molten metal, ringing anvils, and the creation of the tools that will break the Mongol line. The final legacy of the second part of the Ghost of Tsushima is a story of the strength in the steady eye. You have seen the warrior walk through the mist and the bamboo to find the focus within his own spirit. You have felt the sting of the wind and the weight of the betrayal. As the gray glow of the mountain fades into the evening shadows and the first campfire of the valley appears below, you feel a sense of simple and sacred purpose. The story of Jin Sakai finds its second and grounded resolution in the learning of the bow, leaving behind the world of the sword for a world of distance, precision, and a journey that continues to climb. The journey moves away from the high, whistling winds of the peak and descends into the valley of Komatsu, a place that was once the beating heart of the island's steel. This is the region of the ringing anvil and the smoldering coal, where the air is no longer thin and sharp, but thick with the smell of heavy smoke and the metallic tang of cooling iron. This part of the history is a story of the forge's awakening, a realization that the ghost cannot fight with a broken blade, and that the strength of the samurai must be tempered in the fire of the common man. The atmosphere here is hot, hazy, and tense, and the ground beneath Jin's boots is a floor of dark, packed earth and charcoal dust that stains the hem of his traveling clothes. The air tastes of soot, pine wood, and the bitter scent of scorched leather. The sound of the world is a low and constant rattle, the sound of the wind moving through the abandoned workshops and empty market stalls, making the entire village feel like a colossal iron skeleton. Jin leads himself toward the great central forge, his hand feeling the warmth still radiating from the stone walls, realizing that in Komatsu, the danger is the fire that has gone out. As Jin enters the main smithy, the atmosphere shifts to one of hollow industry. He finds the bellows silent and the hammers lying idle on the floor, covered in a fine layer of gray ash. This is the era of the cold hearth, where the atmosphere is one of lost craft and hidden fear. You see the way the sunlight streaks through the holes in the thatched roof, illuminating the dust motes like tiny sparks that will never catch fire. This part of the history is a story of the smith's silence, a realization that the Mongols have taken the artisans to turn their skills against the island. The sound of a single drop of water hitting a cooling vat is a sharp and hollow plink, a noise that emphasizes the emptiness of the hall. Jin moves with a sturdy and measured might, finding Taka, the young, trembling swordsmith, hiding beneath a pile of raw ore. Realizing that to save the island, he must first give this man back his courage. He feels the steady heat of the embers and the raw weight of the hammer in his mind, a feeling of total and grounded preparation. Deep within the storage cellars of the forge, the atmosphere becomes cramped and suffocating. Jin and Taka must move through the narrow passages where the iron is kept, avoiding the Mongol guards who patrol the village above. This is the trial of the silent shadow, where the atmosphere becomes one of muffled breaths and scraping stone. The warriors find that the air is thin and smells of damp earth and rusted metal, a realization that the forge is as much a prison as it is a workshop. The sound of the Mongol boots on the wooden floorboards above is a deep and rhythmic thud, making the cellar feel like the inside of a drum. This part of the history is a realization that to reclaim the forge, they must strike from the roots of the village. He feels the steady pulse in the wrist and the constant pressure of the dark against his back, a feeling of total and grounded focus. At the center of the village square, the group encounters a Mongol executioner, a massive man wearing a helmet of black iron and carrying a heavy, two-handed axe that he swings with a slow and bone-crushing weight. The fight is a story of the steel against the axe. The atmosphere is violent, bright, and smoky as the forge is finally lit, sending plumes of orange sparks into the sky, while Jin dances around the heavy strikes of the giant. This is the trial of the first spark, where the atmosphere becomes one of high heat and desperate movement. Jin must move with a brutal and direct efficiency, his katana flashing in the firelight as he finds the gaps in the executioner's heavy plate. The sound of the axe hitting the stone is a deep and final boom, making the air feel like it is filled with the vibration of the earth. When the executioner finally falls into the dirt, the atmosphere shifts to a heavy and searing stillness, a realization that the fire of Komatsu is once again under the command of the ghost. Leaving the square, the journey leads to the edge of the cooling vats, where the first new blades of the resistance are being quenched in the water. The atmosphere is vast, hissing, and translucent, a realization that the iron of the island is being reborn in a new shape. This part of the history is a story of the quenched soul, where the atmosphere is one of relief and renewed purpose. You see the way the steam rises in white clouds, hiding the warriors from the Mongol reinforcements that circle the village. The air is warm and carries the taste of salt and hot metal. The sound of the steam escaping is a high and constant hiss, signaling that the breath of the forge is a powerful and protective force. The walk through the smithy's garden is a story of the crafted future. Taka shows Jin the first tools he has made for the ghost, a climbing hook and a set of throwing blades that do not follow the path of the samurai. This is a moment of raw and uncomfortable truth. The atmosphere is somber and still, a realization that to win this war, Jin must embrace the tools of a thief. This part of the history is a story of the new edge, where the tradition of the sword meets the necessity of the shadow. The sound of their boots on the gravel path is a sharp and respectful click, making Jin feel solid and heavy in a world that is moving away from the light. He moves with a sturdy and balanced power, his hand gripping the cold iron of the new hook, realizing that the way of the ghost is a path forged in the heat of a broken world. Deep in the heart of the village camp, the final trial of the third part takes place as the survivors huddle together in the warmth of the main furnace. The atmosphere is intimate, hot, and resolute, a realization that the smoke of the forge is now a signal to the rest of the island that the ghost is coming. This is a story of the sovereignty of the living iron, where they watch the hammers strike the metal in time with their own hearts. The conversation is a moment of grounded humanity as they talk about the simple iron kettles they used to make for tea, and how the metal of the home has become the metal of the war. The sound of the hammers ringing in the night is a deep and harmonic note, signaling that the true enemy is the silence that comes when the people stop creating. The experience at the Forge of Komatsu ends with Jin standing at the gates of the village, looking toward the next region, the Golden Temple of Ariake. The black of the iron has led to a sovereignty of the white silk. He carries the weight of the smith's new blade and the silence of the furnace. The atmosphere is one of quiet and hardened resolve, a realization that the path to the ghost is now a path of the hidden weapon. The focus would now shift to the refuge of the faith, as the history prepared to follow the trail of the monk into a world of orange robes, incense smoke, and the gathering of the people who have nowhere else to go. The final legacy of the third part of the Ghost of Tsushima is a story of the strength in the tempered heart. You have seen the warrior walk through the smoke and the fire to find the edge within his own spirit. You have felt the sting of the heat and the weight of the hammer. As the orange glow of the forge fades into the evening shadows and the first white mist of the temple appears on the horizon, you feel a sense of simple and sacred purpose. The story of Jin Sakai finds its third and grounded resolution in the creation of the tools, leaving behind the world of the pure samurai for a world of utility, shadows, and a journey that continues to harden. Journey moves away from the heat of the forge and climbs toward the Golden Temple of Ariake, a place where the air is soft and the world is painted in the colors of falling leaves. This is the region of the sacred refuge and the rising prayer, where the smell of smoke is replaced by the sweet, thick scent of incense and old parchment. This part of the history is a story of the spirit's shield, a realization that a warrior cannot win a war only with steel. He must also give the people a reason to hope. The atmosphere here is bright, calm, and fragile, and the ground beneath Jin's boots is a path of smooth stones and yellow ginkgo leaves that feel like a golden carpet leading to the heavens. The air tastes of mountain spring water, cedar wood, and the faint, dusty scent of ancient scrolls. The sound of the world is a low and constant chant, the sound of monks praying in the distance, and the ringing of a single brass bell, making the entire temple feel like a colossal, golden lantern in the middle of a dark storm. Jin leads himself through the great gate, his hand loosening the grip on his sword to show peace, realizing that in Ariake, the danger is the realization that you cannot save everyone. As Jin enters the main courtyard, the atmosphere shifts to one of crowded sorrow. He finds hundreds of refugees huddled beneath the eaves of the temple, their faces pale with hunger, and their eyes wide with the memory of the fire. This is the era of the whispered name, where the atmosphere is one of shared grief and growing legend. You see the way the sunlight catches the gold-leafed pillars, making the temple look like it is made of solid light, even as the world around it falls to ash. This part of the history is a story of the monk's burden, a realization that the temple is no longer a place of study, but a fortress of the soul. The sound of a child crying in the corner is a high and thin note, a noise that breaks the peace of the incense like a stone hitting glass. Jin moves with a sturdy and measured might, finding Norio, a tall, powerful monk with a shaved head and a staff made of dark wood, realizing that to protect this place, he must bridge the gap between the warrior and the priest. He feels the steady warmth of the sun and the raw weight of the prayers in the air, a feeling of total and grounded responsibility. Deep within the library of the ancestors, the atmosphere becomes cramped and dusty. Jin and Norio must search for the records of the local families to help find those who were lost in the chaos. This is the trial of the paper memory, where the atmosphere becomes one of quiet concentration and muffled echoes. The warriors find that the shelves are filled with the history of 1,000 years, a realization that the Mongols are trying to burn not just the people, but the memory of who they are. The sound of the paper rustling in the wind is a soft and dry whisper, making the library feel like the inside of a sleeping mind. This part of the history is a realization that to defeat the invader, they must protect the roots of the island. He feels the steady grain of the wood and the constant pressure of the history against his mind, a feeling of total and grounded focus. At the base of the great Buddha statue, the group encounters a Mongol inquisitor, a man wearing robes of dark silk and carrying a spear tipped with a hooked blade that he moves with a serpentine and precise lethality. The fight is a story of the spirit against the hook. The atmosphere is violent, bright, and sacred as the monk's staff clatters against the spear while Jin strikes from the shadows of the pillars. This is the trial of the defiled ground, where the atmosphere becomes one of fast movements and spiritual outrage. Jin must move with a brutal and direct efficiency, his blade cutting through the air with a sound like silk tearing. The sound of the staff hitting the stone floor is a deep and final thud, making the air feel like it is, filled with the vibration of a bell. When the Inquisitor finally falls at the feet of the statue, the atmosphere shifts to a heavy and fragrant stillness, a realization that the temple has been stained by the war. Leaving the statue, the journey leads to the edge of the meditation pond, where the water is covered in floating lanterns lit for the dead. The atmosphere is vast, quiet, and luminous, a realization that the people are using their final resources to honor those they have lost. This part of the history is a story of the floating light, where the atmosphere is one of melancholic beauty and lasting hope. You see the way the orange flames reflect in the dark water, looking like a second sky beneath the earth. The air is cool and carries the taste of lotus and wet stone. The sound of the water lapping against the shore is a soft and constant rhythm, signaling that the spirit of Ariake is a river that continues to flow even in the dark. The walk through the cemetery of the unknown is a story of the unmarked grave. Norio shows Jin the rows of simple wooden stakes where the refugees have buried their families. This is a moment of raw and heavy silence. The atmosphere is somber and still, a realization that the war is measured in the length of the trenches dug for the fallen. This part of the history is a story of the White Shroud, where the tradition of the burial meets the reality of the mass grave. The sound of their boots on the damp soil is a dull and respectful thud, making Jin feel solid and heavy in a world that is being emptied of its people. He moves with a sturdy and balanced power, his hand helping a monk lift a heavy stone, realizing that the way of the ghost must also be a way of the protector. Deep in the heart of the temple camp, the final trial of the fourth part takes place as Jin and Norio stand on the highest balcony of the pagoda at sunset. The atmosphere is intimate, cold, and resolute, a realization that the light of the temple is a target for the enemy. This is a story of the sovereignty of the shared watch, where they look out over the valley and see the Mongol campfires beginning to blink in the dark. The conversation is a moment of grounded humanity as they talk about the simple rice cakes they used to share, and how the hunger of the belly is nothing compared to the hunger of the soul. The sound of a temple horn blowing for the evening prayer is a long and deep note, signaling that the true enemy is the despair that tells you the gods have turned away. The experience at the Golden Temple ends with Jin standing at the edge of the forest path, looking toward the next region, the shadow of the castle. The gold of the ginkgo has led to a sovereignty of the Black Wall. He carries the weight of the monk's blessing and the silence of the refugees. The atmosphere is one of quiet and hardened resolve, a realization that the path to the ghost is now a path of the liberator. The focus would now shift to the rescue of Lord Shimura, as the history prepared to follow the trail of the iron into a world of fortified walls, archer towers, and the final gate that stands between Jin and his family. The final legacy of the fourth part of the Ghost of Tsushima is a story of the strength in the gentle hand. You have seen the warrior walk through the incense and the leaves to find the compassion within his own spirit. You have felt the sting of the cold and the weight of the prayer. As the golden glow of the temple fades into the evening shadows and the first cold blue of the castle walls appears on the horizon, you feel a sense of simple and sacred purpose. The story of Jin Sakai finds its fourth and grounded resolution in the protection of the weak, leaving behind the world of the solitary fighter for a world of the leader, the legend, and a journey that is finding its voice. The journey moves away from the soft light of the temple and arrives at the base of the cliffs surrounding Castle Kanda. This is the region of the Great Wall and the crashing sea, where the air is freezing and the world is made of wet, jagged stone and the shadow of the fortress above. This part of the history is a story of the climb of the ghost, a realization that the front gate is a trap, and the only way forward is to master the path of the mountain. The atmosphere here is dark, cold, and roaring, and the ground beneath Jin's boots is a thin strip of rocky beach that is constantly being hit by the salt spray of the ocean. The air tastes of salt, wet iron, and the sharp scent of the pine trees that cling to the cliffside. The sound of the world is a constant and massive boom, the sound of the Pacific waves hitting the rocks like a hammer, making the entire castle feel like a colossal black crown sitting on the head of a giant. Jin leads his small group of allies toward the hidden cracks in the stone, his hand checking the strength of the new iron hook taka forged for him, realizing that in Kanda, the danger is the height that wants to pull you back to the earth. As Jin begins to climb the vertical wall, the atmosphere shifts to one of dizzying focus. He finds that the stone is slick with sea moss, and the wind tries to push him away from the surface. This is the era of the vertical path, where the atmosphere is one of muscle strain and total silence. You see the way his fingers grip the narrow ledges, his knuckles turning white as he pulls his weight upward, inch by inch. This part of the history is a story of the iron grip, a realization that the ghost must be as steady as the mountain he climbs. The sound of the iron hook hitting the stone is a sharp and metallic clink, a noise that is swallowed by the roar of the sea below. Jin moves with a sturdy and measured might, his eyes fixed only on the next handhold, feeling the cold spray on his back and the steady burn of the arms. As he rises toward the Mongol patrols, he feels the rough texture of the granite and the constant vibration of the wind against his body, a feeling of total and grounded persistence. Deep within the inner courtyard of the castle, the atmosphere becomes cramped and lethal. Jin and Yuna must move through the shadows of the supply wagons and the wooden barricades, avoiding the gaze of the archers on the rooftops. This is the trial of the held breath, where the atmosphere becomes one of extreme tension and muffled footsteps. The warriors find that the castle is a maze of sharpened stakes and red Mongol banners, a realization that the home of the Shimura clan has been turned into a den of wolves. The sound of the Mongol guards laughing by the fire is a harsh and deep rattle, making the courtyard feel like the inside of an enemy's mouth. This part of the history is a realization that to save his uncle, Jin must become the shadow that the walls cannot hold. He feels the steady pulse in the throat and the constant pressure of the dark against his chest, a feeling of total and grounded stealth. At the base of the central keep, the group encounters a Mongol shield breaker, a man wearing heavy plates of boiled leather and carrying a spiked mace that he swings with a wild and bone-cracking speed. The fight is a story of the ghost against the mace. The atmosphere is violent, dark, and sudden as the guard tries to pin Jin against the stone wall, while the rain begins to fall in heavy, cold sheets. This is the trial of the narrow escape, where the atmosphere becomes one of fast reflexes and sharp steel. Jin must move with a brutal and direct efficiency, using his new throwing blades to blind the guard before closing in for the final strike. The sound of the mace hitting the stone is a deep and final boom, making the air feel like it is filled with the spark of metal. When the guard finally falls into the mud, the atmosphere shifts to a heavy and rain-soaked stillness, a realization that the keep is no longer guarded. Leaving the courtyard, the journey leads to the top of the high tower, where Lord Shimura is kept in a cage of iron and wood. The atmosphere is vast, windy, and somber, a realization that the man who raised Jin is now a broken prisoner of the Khan. This part of the history is a story of the rescue of the father, where the atmosphere is one of relief mixed with shame. You see the way the light of the moon reflects off the bars of the cage, making the old samurai look like a ghost of the past. The air is freezing and carries the taste of salt and old iron. The sound of the lock breaking is a sharp and ringing snap, signaling that the chain of the invader has finally been cut. The walk through the burning bridge is a story of the great escape. As Jin and Lord Shimura fight their way out of the castle, the Mongols set the wooden bridge on fire to trap them. This is a moment of raw and violent reality. The atmosphere is bright and chaotic, a realization that the rescue is only half the battle. This part of the history is a story of the flame of the north, where the tradition of the samurai meets the desperation of the survivor. The sound of the wood cracking in the heat is a sharp and constant pop, making Jin feel solid and heavy in a world that is melting around him. He moves with a sturdy and balanced power, his sword clearing a path through the smoke, realizing that the way of the ghost has saved his family, but at the cost of his own honor in the eyes of his uncle. Deep in the heart of the forest camp after the escape, the final trial of the fifth part takes place as Jin and Lord Shimura stand by a low and hidden fire in the rain. The atmosphere is intimate, cold, and tense, a realization that the rescue has created a gap between them that may never close. This is a story of the sovereignty of the two paths, where the uncle speaks of the code of the samurai and the nephew speaks of the need to win. The conversation is a moment of grounded humanity, as they realize that the island of Tsushima has changed forever, and they have changed with it. The sound of the rain hitting the leaves is a soft and constant thrum, signaling that the true enemy is the distance between those who love each other. The experience at Castle Kanda ends with Jin standing at the edge of the northern pass, looking toward the frozen lands of Toyotama. The black of the castle has led to a sovereignty of the white snow. He carries the weight of the broken honor and the silence of the rescue. The atmosphere is one of quiet and hardened resolve, a realization that the path to the ghost is now a path of the exile. The focus would now shift to the gathering of the army, as the history prepared to follow the trail of the cold into a world of frozen lakes, snowy forests, and the building of a force that can take back the north. The final legacy of the fifth part of the Ghost of Tsushima is a story of the strength in the heavy choice. You have seen the warrior walk through the sea and the stone to find the resolve within his own spirit. You have felt the sting of the wind and the weight of the flame. As the orange glow of the burning castle fades into the evening shadows and the first white flakes of the northern snow appear on the horizon, you feel a sense of simple and sacred purpose. The story of Jin Sakai finds its fifth and grounded resolution in the rescue of the clan, leaving behind the world of the prisoner for a world of the rebel, the leader, and a journey that is heading into the winter. The journey moves away from the burning bridge and enters the frozen border of Toyotama, a region where the green world is buried under a layer of white silence and bitter frost. This is the path to the Omi village, the place where Jin was born, but it is no longer the home of his memories. The atmosphere here is cold, sharp, and muted, and the ground beneath the hooves of the horses is a thick blanket of deep snow that hides the mud and the stones. The air tastes of mountain ice, pine needles, and the faint, dry scent of wood smoke that travels for miles in the still air. The sound of the world is a low and muffled hiss, the sound of the wind moving over the frozen lakes, making the entire region feel like a colossal, sleeping grave. Jin leads himself through the narrow mountain passes, his hand pulling his fur-lined cloak tight against his armor, realizing that in the frozen north, the danger is the cold that slows your heart before the enemy even finds your tracks. As Jin descends into the valley of Omi, the atmosphere shifts to one of ghostly recognition. He finds the old rice paddies frozen into sheets of gray glass, and the village gates draped in the heavy, black banners of the Mongol Empire. This is the era of the frozen past, where the atmosphere is one of lost childhood and hard reality. You see the way the sunlight reflects off the icicles hanging from the rooftops, looking like rows of crystal teeth. This part of the history is a story of the cold homecoming, a realization that the peace of his youth has been replaced by the iron of the invader. The sound of a crow calling from a dead branch is a high and lonely note, a noise that makes the silence of the village feel even deeper. Jin moves with a sturdy and measured might, his eyes tracking the smoke rising from the old Sakai estate, realizing that the Mongols are now living in the halls where he first learned to hold a sword. he feels the steady bite of the wind and the raw weight of the memories in his chest, a feeling of total and grounded sadness. Deep within the bamboo thickets of the Omi woods, the atmosphere becomes confined and brittle. Jin must navigate through the frozen stalks that snap like bone in the cold, avoiding the Mongol dogs of war, large gray wolves that have been trained to track the scent of blood in the snow. This is the trial of the hidden predator, where the atmosphere becomes one of low growls and sudden shadows. The warriors find that the snow is so deep it swallows the sound of their movement, but it also leaves a clear trail for the enemy to follow. The sound of the wolves' paws hitting the crust of the ice is a soft and rhythmic scuff, making the thicket feel like the inside of a hunter's trap. This part of the history is a realization that to survive the north, Jin must become the winter himself. He feels the steady pulse in the ears and the constant pressure of the frost against his skin, a feeling of total and grounded vigilance. At the edge of the frozen lake, the group encounters a Mongol beastmaster, a man draped in the skins of bears and carrying a heavy, hooked chain that he swings with a wild and grating rattle. The fight is a story of the steel against the chain. The atmosphere is violent, bright, and freezing as the ice beneath their feet cracks and groans under the weight of the struggle. This is the trial of the unstable ground, where the atmosphere becomes one of sliding movements and sharp reflexes. Jin must move with a brutal and direct efficiency, his sword finding the gaps in the furs, while the wolves circle him in the white haze. The sound of the chain hitting the ice is a sharp and ringing snap, making the air feel like it is filled with the spark of the cold. When the master finally falls into the dark water of a broken patch of ice, the atmosphere shifts to a heavy and misted stillness, a realization that the lake is a place that never forgets. Leaving the lake, the journey leads to the Omi cemetery, where the ancestors of the Sakai clan are buried beneath the stone lanterns. The atmosphere is vast, still, and holy, a realization that the history of the island is rooted in this frozen earth. This part of the history is a story of the silent ancestor, where the atmosphere is one of duty and eternal watch. You see the way the snow has gathered on the stone hats of the statues, looking like white crowns. The air is dry and carries the taste of salt and old stone. The sound of the wind whistling through the lanterns is a low and haunting moan, signaling that the spirit of the Sakai is a flame that still burns beneath the ice. The walk through the old training circle is a story of the broken lesson. Jin remembers the voice of his father and the way the wooden swords used to sound in the summer air. This is a moment of raw and private grief. The atmosphere is somber and still, a realization that he is now the last of his line, fighting a war that his father never could have imagined. This part of the history is a story of the shattered wood, where the memory of the samurai meets the reality of the ghost. The sound of his boots on the frozen ground is a dull and respectful thud, making Jin feel solid and heavy in a world that is being turned into a memory. He moves with a sturdy and balanced power, his hand touching the trunk of a withered maple tree, realizing that the way of the ghost is the only thing that will keep these stones from being forgotten. Deep in the heart of the village camp after the skirmish, the final trial of the sixth part takes place as Jin huddles with the survivors in a small and secret root cellar. The atmosphere is intimate, cold, and resolute, a realization that the warmth of a home is something they must build for themselves in the dark. This is a story of the sovereignty of the shared warmth, where they share a small pot of hot tea and talk about the spring that will eventually come. The conversation is a moment of grounded humanity, as they realize that the North is not just a place of ice, but a place of endurance. The sound of the Mongol patrols shouting in the distance is a harsh and constant threat, signaling that the true enemy is the coldness that tries to steal your hope. The experience at Omi village ends with Jin standing on the hill, overlooking his family estate, looking toward the next region, the marshlands of Yumugi. The white of the snow has led to a sovereignty of the gray mist. He carries the weight of the father's memory and the silence of the frozen home. The atmosphere is one of quiet and hardened resolve, a realization that the path to the ghost is now a path of the exile's return. The focus would now shift to the den of thieves, as the history prepared to follow the trail of the fog into a world of hidden coves, pirate ships, and the gathering of the men who live outside the law. The final legacy of the sixth part of the Ghost of Tsushima is a story of the strength in the frozen heart. You have seen the warrior walk through the snow and the memories to find the anchor within his own spirit. You have felt the sting of the ice and the weight of the past. As the white glow of the Omi Valley fades into the evening shadows and the first gray mists of the marsh appear on the horizon, you feel a sense of simple and sacred purpose. The story of Jin Sakai finds its sixth and grounded resolution in the honoring of the blood, leaving behind the world of the child for a world of the man, the legend, and a journey that is descending into the mist. The journey moves away from the freezing silence of the mountains and descends into the Yumugi Marsh, a region where the world is hidden beneath a constant gray fog and the smell of salt water. This is the path to the Yumugi Cove, a place that does not exist on the maps of the samurai, where the land is made of rotting wood, thick reeds, and the secrets of men who live by the sword, but follow no lord. The atmosphere here is warm, humid, and tense, and the ground beneath Jin's boots is a network of narrow, creaking boardwalks that float over the deep, black mud of the swamp. The air tastes of stagnant water, dried fish, and the sharp, chemical scent of cheap sake. The sound of the world is a low and constant slap, the sound of the marsh water hitting the wooden pillars, and the buzzing of insects in the tall grass, making the entire cove feel like a colossal, hidden nest. Jin leads himself through the winding docks, his hand staying away from the hilt of his sword to avoid looking like a threat to the Ronin, realizing that in the marsh, the danger is the shadow that has no name. As Jin enters the heart of Yumugi Cove, the atmosphere shifts to one of lawless observation. He finds the boardwalks crowded with men in tattered straw cloaks and women with sharp eyes who watch every stranger with a silent and heavy suspicion. This is the era of the hidden Ronin, where the atmosphere is one of broken oaths and sharp daggers. You see the way the lanterns hang from the low eaves of the huts, their dim orange light barely cutting through the thick mist. This part of the history is a story of the pirate's peace, a realization that while the rest of the island burns, the cove survives by being too difficult to find. The sound of a flute playing from a high balcony is a thin and melancholy note, a noise that makes the crowded docks feel lonely. Jin moves with a sturdy and measured might, finding Lady Sanjo, the ruler of the cove, who sits behind a screen of white silk, realizing that to get the help of these men, he must prove that the ghost is more dangerous than the Khan. He feels the sticky heat of the fog and the raw weight of the gazes on his back, a feeling of total and grounded vigilance. Deep within the reeds of the outer marsh, the atmosphere becomes confined and smothering. Jin must track a group of Mongol trappers who have been capturing the cove's messengers, moving through water that reaches his waist while the tall grass hides the horizon. This is the trial of the sunken step, where the atmosphere becomes one of muffled splashes and hidden breath. The warriors find that the mud is like glue, trying to hold their feet in place while the mosquitoes swarm in the heat. The sound of the marsh gas bubbling up from the earth is a soft and gurgling pop, making the swamp feel like the inside of a living stomach. This part of the history is a realization that to win in the marsh, Jin must learn to strike from the water. He feels the steady pulse in the temples and the constant pressure of the humidity against his lungs, a feeling of total and grounded patience. At the center of the drowning bridge, the group encounters a Mongol harpooner, a man wearing leather armor reinforced with shark skin, and carrying a heavy, barbed spear attached to a long rope that he throws with a wicked and whistling accuracy. The fight is a story of the steel against the rope. The atmosphere is violent, misted, and slippery as the wooden bridge sways over the black water, while Jin dodges the iron hook that tries to pull him into the mud. This is the trial of the unstable footing, where the atmosphere becomes one of rapid leaps and precarious balance. Jin must move with a brutal and direct efficiency, his blade cutting through the rope before the harpooner can pull it back. The sound of the harpoon hitting the wood is a sharp and splintering crack, making the air feel like it is filled with the splinters of the marsh. When the harpooner finally falls into the reeds, the atmosphere shifts to a heavy and bubbling stillness, a realization that the water is the ultimate judge. Leaving the bridge, the journey leads to the ladies' balcony, where Jin stands overlooking the entire hidden cove as the sun sets behind the fog. The atmosphere is vast, gray, and secretive, a realization that there is a whole world of people who have been forgotten by the shogun and the samurai alike. This part of the history is a story of the unbound warrior, where the atmosphere is one of freedom and moral grayness. You see the way the smoke from the cooking fires rises in straight lines into the still air, looking like pillars holding up the sky. The air is warm and carries the taste of salt and roasted rice. The sound of the ocean waves breaking against the outer rocks is a deep and distant roar, signaling that the safety of the cove is a fragile thing held together by the mist. The walk through the Ronin's graveyard is a story of the fated name. Lady Sanjo shows Jin the small wooden markers placed in the mud for the men who died without a lord to bury them. This is a moment of raw and heavy truth. The atmosphere is somber and still, a realization that the life of a Ronin is a path that ends in the mud of a swamp. This part of the history is a story of the discarded banner, where the pride of the samurai meets the reality of the survivor. The sound of their boots on the rotting wood is a dull and respectful thud, making Jin feel solid and heavy in a world that values nothing but the next day of life. He moves with a sturdy and balanced power, his hand touching a mossy post, realizing that the way of the ghost is closer to the way of these men than he ever wanted to admit. Deep in the heart of the tavern at night, the final trial of the 7th part takes place as Jin drinks with the Ronin in a cramped and smoky room. The atmosphere is intimate, warm, and dangerous, a realization that the loyalty of these men is bought with blood, not with promises of honor. This is a story of the sovereignty of the shared cup, where they talk about the battles they fought for lords who forgot their names, and the scars they carry for a country that considers them criminals. The conversation is a moment of grounded humanity, as Jin realizes that to lead them, he must speak their language of survival. The sound of a Ronin sharpening his sword in the corner is a high and grating scrape, signaling that the true enemy is the hunger that makes a man sell his soul. The experience at Yumugi Marsh ends with Jin standing at the edge of the boardwalk, looking toward the next region, the crimson forests of Akashima. The gray of the mist has led to a sovereignty of the red leaf. He carries the weight of the lady's agreement and the silence of the outcasts. The atmosphere is one of quiet and hardened resolve, a realization that the path to the ghost is now a path of the shadow army. The focus would now shift to the healing of the land, as the history prepared to follow the trail of the blood into a world of red maples, poisonous flowers, and the gathering of the medicine that will save the wounded. The final legacy of the 7th part of the Ghost of Tsushima is a story of the strength in the hidden hand. You have seen the warrior walk through the mud and the mist to find the truth within his own spirit. You have felt the sting of the heat and the weight of the suspicion. As the gray glow of the marsh fades into the evening shadows and the first red leaves of Akashima appear on the horizon, you feel a sense of simple and sacred purpose. The story of Jin Sakai finds its 7th and grounded resolution in the alliance with the shadows, leaving behind the world of the solitary samurai for a world of the commander, the rebel, and a journey that is turning red. journey moves away from the gray haze of the marsh and enters the Akashima district, a region where the world is painted in the deep crimson of the maple and the pale white of the lily. This is the path to the village of healers, a place where the air is sweet with the scent of drying herbs, but heavy with the memory of the sick. This part of the history is a story of the healing poison, a realization that the ghost must learn not just how to take life, but how to use the secrets of the earth to strike from within. The atmosphere here is warm, fragrant, and somber, and the ground beneath Jin's boots is a soft carpet of fallen red leaves and damp soil that muffles the sound of his approach. The air tastes of lavender, bitter roots, and the damp, earthy smell of the peat bogs. The sound of the world is a low and constant rustle, the sound of the wind moving through the red branches, and the distant bubbling of the medicinal springs, making the entire forest feel like a colossal, living pharmacy. Jin leads himself toward the old family estate, finding Yuriko, the elderly woman who served his family for generations, realizing that in Akashima, the danger is the knowledge of how easily the body can be broken. As Jin walks with Yuriko through the fields of white flowers, the atmosphere shifts to one of gentle melancholy. He finds that the Mongol alchemists have been harvesting the local flora to create their own toxins, turning the beauty of the island into a weapon of terror. This is the era of the poisoned well, where the atmosphere is one of invisible threats and botanical war. You see the way the sunlight filters through the red canopy, casting a bloody glow on the white petals below. This part of the history is a story of the caretaker's gift, a realization that the wisdom of the old is the sharpest tool the ghost can carry. The sound of Yuriko's knife cutting a reed is a sharp and dry snap, a noise that signals the birth of a new kind of warfare. Jin moves with a sturdy and measured might, his hands stained with the juices of the crushed blossoms as he learns the recipes of his ancestors. He feels the steady heat of the afternoon and the raw weight of the legacy in his palms, a feeling of total and grounded focus. Deep within the sunken bogs of Akashima, the atmosphere becomes confined and toxic. Jin must track the Mongol alchemists to their hidden laboratory, moving through water that is covered in a layer of yellow pollen and thick green slime. This is the trial of the silent breath, where the atmosphere becomes one of heavy air and muffled distant cries. The warriors find that the air in the bog is stagnant and carries the taste of sulfur and rotten petals, a realization that the land itself is being made sick by the enemy's presence. The sound of the alchemist's glass vials clinking together is a high and fragile note, making the bog feel like the inside of a laboratory. This part of the history is a realization that to stop the poison, Jin must become the antidote. He feels the steady pulse in the chest and the constant pressure of the heat against his neck, a feeling of total and grounded patience. At the center of the Crimson Grove, the group encounters a Mongol alchemist, a man wearing a mask of heavy leather and carrying a jar of volatile gas that he hurls with a fast and wicked arc. The fight is a story of the steel against the vapor. The atmosphere is violent, hazy, and lethal, as the grove is filled with a cloud of choking purple smoke that blinds the eyes and burns the throat. This is the trial of the inner sight, where the atmosphere becomes one of sudden panic and sharp reflexes. Jin must move with a brutal and direct efficiency, holding his breath as he strikes through the fog with the new poison darts Yuriko helped him craft. The sound of the glass jar shattering on the stone is a sharp and splintering pop, making the air feel like it is filled with the sting of the scorpion. When the alchemist finally falls among the red leaves, the atmosphere shifts to a heavy and fragrant stillness, a realization that the ghost has found a new way to kill without a sound. Leaving the grove, the journey leads to the healer's terrace, where the villagers are being treated for the Mongol toxins. The atmosphere is vast, somber, and healing, a realization that the war is being fought in the blood of the people as much as on the battlefield. This part of the history is a story of the bitter medicine, where the atmosphere is one of resilience and scientific grace. You see the way the steam rises from the wooden tubs, carrying the scent of cedar and pine. The air is warm and carries the taste of salt and boiled herbs. The sound of the wind through the temple bells is a low and musical note, signaling that the spirit of Akashima is a force that mends what is broken. The walk through the old garden of the Sakai is a story of the fatting teacher. Yuriko tells Jin stories of his mother and the way she used to tend to the flowers before the world turned to iron. This is a moment of raw and private grief. The atmosphere is somber and still, a realization that the knowledge she gives him is the final gift of a dying age. This part of the history is a story of the last lesson, where the gentleness of the past meets the brutality of the present. The sound of their boots on the mossy path is a dull and respectful thud, making Jin feel solid and heavy in a world that is losing its elders. He moves with a sturdy and balanced power, his hand clutching the small pouch of poison, realizing that the way of the ghost is a burden he must carry alone to protect those who cannot fight. Deep in the heart of the village clinic at night, the final trial of the 8th part takes place as Jin watches Yuriko fall into a deep and final sleep beneath the maple trees. The atmosphere is intimate, cold, and peaceful, a realization that the last link to his childhood has been cut. This is a story of the sovereignty of the quiet ending, where he realizes that the island of Tsushima is a place of endless cycles of life and death. The conversation is over. There is only the sound of the wind in the leaves and the memory of her voice. The sound of a distant owl is a long and lonesome note, signaling that the true enemy is the time that takes everyone we love. The experience at Akashima ends with Jin standing at the edge of the red forest, looking toward the next region, the coast of Yarikawa. The red of the maple has led to a sovereignty of the white moon. He carries the weight of the healer's secret and the silence of the grove. The atmosphere is one of quiet and hardened resolve, a realization that the path to the ghost is now a path of the hidden venom. The focus would now shift to the siege of the rebellion, as the history prepared to follow the trail of the iron into a world of massive walls, thousands of arrows, and the gathering of the strongest army the island has ever seen. The final legacy of the 8th part of the Ghost of Tsushima is a story of the strength in the quiet strike. You have seen the warrior walk through the flowers and the smoke to find the edge within his own spirit. You have felt the sting of the loss and the weight of the legacy. As the red glow of the forest fades into the evening shadows and the first white walls of Yarikawa appear on the horizon, you feel a sense of simple and sacred purpose. The story of Jin Sakai finds its 8th and grounded resolution in the mastery of the poison, leaving behind the world of the open blade for a world of the shadow, the needle, and a journey that is reaching its turning point. The journey leaves the quiet, medicinal air of the red forests and arrives at the massive, stone-bound walls of Yarikawa. This is the region of the eternal siege and the iron will, where the world is made of heavy timber, deep trenches, and the constant, vibrating hum of 1,000 voices waiting for the end. This part of the history is a story of the ghost's birth, a realization that to save a city that hates your clan, you must become something more than a man. You must become a legend that walks through fire. The atmosphere here is gray, tense, and smoldering, and the ground beneath Jin's boots is a floor of cold, hard mud, and the splintered remains of defensive stakes that have been hammered into the earth over and over again. The air tastes of wet iron, wood smoke, and the sharp, salt scent of the nearby ocean. The sound of the world is a constant and heavy drum, the sound of the Mongol war drums beating at the gates like the heart of a monster, making the entire fortress feel like a colossal stone cage that is about to burst. Jin leads himself through the crowded, narrow streets of the city, his hand feeling the cold vibration of the stone walls, realizing that in Yarikawa, the danger is the hopelessness that rots a man from the inside. As Jin reaches the top of the main gatehouse, the atmosphere shifts to one of vast and terrible scale. He looks out over the horizon and sees the Mongol army, a sea of black tents and glowing torches that stretches as far as the eye can see. This is the era of the uncounted horde, where the atmosphere is one of suffocating numbers and lingering smoke. You see the way the sunlight reflects off the Mongol siege engines, looking like the skeletal arms of giants reaching for the sky. This part of the history is a story of the wall against the tide, a realization that the people of Yarikawa are not just fighting the invaders, but the memory of their own past rebellions. The sound of 1,000 arrows hitting the stone walls at once is a sharp and hissing chord, a noise that turns the air into a blur of black feathers. Jin moves with a sturdy and measured might, his eyes tracking the movement of the Mongol leaders below, realizing that to break this siege, he must strike the heart of the storm. He feels the steady ache in the shoulders and the raw weight of the armor against his chest, a feeling of total and grounded preparation. Deep within the narrow alleys of the lower city, the atmosphere becomes cramped and violent. Jin and the local archers must push back the Mongol infiltrators who have breached the walls, moving through streets so tight that the blood of the enemy stains the whitewashed walls. This is the trial of the close quarter, where the atmosphere becomes one of sudden grunts and muffled steel. The warriors find that the air is filled with the smell of burning oil and wet wool, a realization that the city is being eaten by the fire from the inside out. The sound of the Mongol shields clashing in the tight space is a harsh and grating snap, making the alleys feel like the inside of a grinding mill. This part of the history is a realization that to save the people, Jin must unleash the terror he has been hiding. He feels the steady pulse in the throat and the constant pressure of the smoke against his eyes, a feeling of total and grounded focus. At the base of the main siege tower, the group encounters the Mongol general Temujin, a man encased in gold-rimmed armor who wields a flaming sword with a wild and blinding ferocity. The fight is a story of the ghost against the general. The atmosphere is violent, bright, and earth-shaking as the flames from the general's blade light up the night sky, turning the falling rain into steam. This is the trial of the legend's edge, where the atmosphere becomes one of extreme heat and precise strikes. Jin must move with a brutal and direct power, his katana clashing against the burning steel with a sound like stone hitting iron. The sound of the general's head hitting the mud after the final strike is a deep and final thud, making the air feel like it is filled with the silence of the dead. When Jin stands over the body and lets out a roar of defiance, the atmosphere shifts to a heavy and terrifying stillness, a realization that the ghost has arrived to claim the island. Leaving the gatehouse, the journey leads to the high bridge, where the people of Yarikawa watch as the Mongol army begins to retreat in fear of the ghost. The atmosphere is vast, rain-soaked, and victorious, a realization that the impossible has been achieved through the power of a name. This part of the history is a story of the reborn city, where the atmosphere is one of shaking relief and new loyalty. You see the way the people bow as Jin passes, not because he is a Sakai, but because he is the shadow that protects them. The air is cold and carries the taste of rain and burnt wood. The sound of the wind through the broken banners is a low and haunting note, signaling that the spirit of Yarikawa has been awakened by the fire. Walk Through the Gate of Heroes is a story of the new legend. Taka and Yuna show Jin the faces of the young men who have joined the resistance, their eyes no longer filled with fear, but with the cold fire of the ghost. This is a moment of raw and heavy realization. The atmosphere is somber and still, a realization that there is no turning back to the way of the samurai now. This part of the history is a story of the shattered mask, where the identity of the warrior is lost in the myth of the protector. The sound of their boots on the stone floor is a sharp and respectful click, making Jin feel solid and heavy in a world that now expects him to be a god of war. He moves with a sturdy and balanced power, his hand gripping his blood-stained cloak, realizing that the way of the ghost is a cage he has built for himself to save his people. Deep in the heart of the city square at night, the final trial of the ninth part takes place as Jin stands before a massive and roaring fire. The atmosphere is intimate, hot, and resolute, a realization that the victory at Yarikawa is just the first step in a much longer march. This is a story of the sovereignty of the shared fear, where the people realize that the ghost is as much a monster to his enemies as he is a hero to his friends. The conversation is over. There is only the sound of the crackling wood and the breathing of a city that has been given a second chance. The sound of a distant Mongol horn is a long and fatting note, signaling that the true enemy is now running from the shadow. The experience at Yarikawa ends with Jin standing at the edge of the city walls, looking toward the next region, the coast of Kushi. The gray of the stone has led to a sovereignty of the blue water. He carries the weight of the general's head and the silence of the army. The atmosphere is one of quiet and hardened resolve, a realization that the path to the ghost is now a path of the unstoppable force. The focus would now shift to the clearing of the fog, as the history prepared to follow the trail of the wind into a world of blue flowers, quiet temples, and the final gathering of the allies before the march on the Khan. The final legacy of the ninth part of the Ghost of Tsushima is a story of the strength in the terrifying legend. You have seen the warrior walk through the fire and the blood to find the power within his own spirit. You have felt the sting of the rain and the weight of the myth. As the orange glow of the city fire fades into the evening shadows and the first blue light of the coast appears on the horizon, you feel a sense of simple and sacred purpose. The story of Jin Sakai finds its ninth and grounded resolution in the birth of the ghost, leaving behind the world of the samurai for a world of the legend, the shadow, and a journey that is becoming a storm. The journey moves away from the blood-stained stones of Yarikawa and enters the Kushi grasslands, a region where the world is a sea of vibrant blue flowers and tall, swaying reeds. This is the path to the Kushi temple, a place of meditation and quiet beauty that feels like it belongs to a dream rather than a war. The atmosphere here is bright, airy, and deceptive, and the ground beneath Jin's boots is a soft, rolling carpet of blue petals and hidden roots that feel like they are trying to trip anyone who moves too fast. The air tastes of sweet nectar, fresh spring water, and the faint, dry scent of sun-baked grass. The sound of the world is a low and constant rustle, the sound of the wind moving through the millions of blue blossoms, making the entire field feel like a colossal, living ocean. Jin leads himself through the knee-deep flowers, his hand resting lightly on the hilt of his sword, realizing that in the grasslands, the danger is the beauty that hides the predator until it is too late. As Jin approaches the outskirts of the temple, the atmosphere shifts to one of hidden danger. He finds that the Mongols have set up camp within the sacred grounds, their black tents looking like dark stains on the blue landscape. This is the era of the stormcallers, where the atmosphere is one of electrical tension and sudden thunder. You see the way the Mongol shamans move through the fields, their staffs decorated with the skulls of birds, calling out to the sky with a deep and gut-wrenching chant that makes the very air vibrate. This part of the history is a story of the sacred ground defiled, a realization that the enemy is now trying to break the spirit of the land itself. The sound of a distant thunderclap in a clear sky is a sharp and dry crack, a noise that signals the arrival of the supernatural war. Jin moves with a sturdy and measured might, his eyes tracking the blue sparks that jump between the shaman's fingers, realizing that to save the temple, he must quiet the storm with a single, silent strike. He feels the steady hum of the air and the raw weight of the humidity against his skin, a feeling of total and grounded focus. Deep within the reeds of the Whispering Pond, the atmosphere becomes cramped and smothering. Jin must navigate through the tall, golden stalks that grow 10 feet high, hiding him from the Mongol archers who circle the water. This is the trial of the hidden breath, where the atmosphere becomes one of soft splashes and muffled steel. The warriors find that the water is cool and clear, but the bottom is a layer of thick, sucking mud that tries to hold their boots in place. The sound of the wind through the reeds is a high and hissing whisper, making the pond feel like the inside of a secret. This part of the history is a realization that to win in the grasslands, Jin must become the wind that moves the grass. He feels the steady pulse in the wrist and the constant pressure of the stalks against his shoulders, a feeling of total and grounded patience. At the center of the temple garden, the group encounters a Mongol stormcaller, a man wearing a mask made of a hollowed-out tree trunk and carrying a staff that crackles with a wicked and blue light. The fight is a story of the steel against the lightning. The atmosphere is violent, bright, and electric, as the shaman calls down bolts of energy that turn the blue flowers into black ash. This is the trial of the fast reflex, where the atmosphere becomes one of blinding flashes and sharp cracks. Jin must move with a brutal and direct power, his sword cutting through the air with a sound like silk tearing as he dodges the dancing sparks. The sound of the staff hitting the stone floor after the final blow is a sharp and metallic clink, making the air feel like it is filled with the ozone of a storm. When the shaman finally falls among the ruined petals, the atmosphere shifts to a heavy and misted stillness, a realization that the sky has been silenced. Leaving the garden, the journey leads to the temple overlook, where the monks have gathered to watch the return of the ghost. The atmosphere is vast, luminous, and sacred, a realization that the people are looking for a sign that the gods haven't abandoned them. This part of the history is a story of the blue horizon, where the atmosphere is one of spiritual relief and lingering fear. You see the way the blue flowers stretch out to meet the blue ocean, looking like the world is made of a single, endless color. The air is warm and carries the taste of salt and honey. The sound of the temple bell ringing once is a long and harmonic note, signaling that the spirit of Kushi has been reclaimed from the dark. The walk through the path of the 5 statues is a story of the fatting monk. Jin talks with the elder of the temple about the nature of violence and whether a man can kill to save without losing his own soul. This is a moment of raw and philosophical grief. The atmosphere is somber and still, a realization that the ghost is a figure that brings peace but cannot participate in it. This part of the history is a story of the broken prayer, where the purity of the temple meets the blood on the warrior's hands. The sound of their boots on the stone path is a dull and respectful thud, making Jin feel solid and heavy in a world that is made of light and flowers. He moves with a sturdy and balanced power, his hand touching the mossy head of a stone fox, realizing that the way of the ghost is a sacrifice of the self for the sake of the many. Deep in the heart of the temple courtyard at night, the final trial of the 10th part takes place as Jin, and the monks sit in silent meditation by the pond. The atmosphere is intimate, cold, and resolute, a realization that the peace they have found is only a brief pause in a much larger war. This is a story of the sovereignty of the shared silence, where they listen to the sound of the frogs and the wind to remember why they are fighting. The conversation is over. There is only the sound of the breathing and the ripples in the water. The sound of a distant Mongol drum from the next valley is a low and constant throb, signaling that the true enemy is already preparing for the next strike. The experience at Kushi grasslands ends with Jin standing at the edge of the blue fields, looking toward the next region, the black sands of Azamo. The blue of the flowers has led to a sovereignty of the dark shore. He carries the weight of the shaman's staff and the silence of the temple. The atmosphere is one of quiet and hardened resolve, a realization that the path to the ghost is now a path of the final gate. The focus would now shift to the return to the beach, as the history prepared to follow the trail of the salt back to where it all began, to finish what started at Komoda. The final legacy of the 10th part of the Ghost of Tsushima is a story of the strength in the still mind. You have seen the warrior walk through the flowers and the lightning to find the anchor within his own spirit. You have felt the sting of the spark and the weight of the beauty. As the blue glow of the fields fades into the evening shadows and the first black sands of the coast appear on the horizon, you feel a sense of simple and sacred purpose. The story of Jin Sakai finds its 10th and grounded resolution in the quieting of the storm, leaving behind the world of the spirit for a world of the shore, the ship, and a journey that is coming full circle. The journey leaves the blue waves of the grasslands and arrives at the edge of the Azamo Bay, a place where the world is made of jagged black cliffs and the deep, cold hunger of the sea. This is the return to the shore, a region of the rushing tide and the rusted chain, where the air is no longer sweet with flowers, but heavy with the thick, choking scent of salt and the rotting wood of sunken ships. This part of the history is a story of the naval ghost, a realization that to break the Mongol grip on the island, Jin must take the fight from the land to the water, turning the very ocean into a graveyard for the invader. The atmosphere here is dark, roaring, and brittle, and the ground beneath Jin's boots is a floor of wet, black pebbles and slippery kelp that pops under his weight like tiny bubbles of air. The air tastes of salt, wet iron, and the sharp chemical bite of the pitch used to seal the Mongol hulls. The sound of the world is a constant and massive boom, the sound of the ocean hitting the cliffs with a force that makes the entire coast feel like a colossal iron drum. Jin leads himself toward the hidden fishing boats of Azamo, his hand checking the tension of the ropes, realizing that in the bay, the danger is the depth that wants to pull you into the dark. As Jin boards the small, narrow vessel to lead the raid, the atmosphere shifts to one of rising motion. He finds that the sea is a chaotic world of white foam and black waves, where the Mongol fleet sits like a row of sleeping monsters. This is the era of the burning fleet, where the atmosphere is one of unstable footing and splashing cold. You see the way the lanterns of the Mongol ships sway in the dark, looking like the glowing eyes of 100 giants watching the water. This part of the history is a story of the wooden wall, a realization that the ghost must strike the ships at their weakest point, the storage of their black powder. The sound of the water slapping against the side of the boat is a sharp and rhythmic clap, a noise that marks the countdown to the first strike. Jin moves with a sturdy and measured might, his body swaying with the roll of the waves, feeling the cold spray on his face and the steady vibration of the hull beneath his feet, a feeling of total and grounded preparation. Deep within the cargo hold of a Mongol warship, the atmosphere becomes cramped and explosive. Jin must navigate through the narrow corridors filled with barrels of gunpowder and stacks of dry grain, moving through a space that is so tight he can hear the heartbeat of the guards in the next room. This is the trial of the silent spark, where the atmosphere becomes one of muffled footsteps and the smell of sulfur. The warriors find that the air is hot and carries the taste of old sweat and dry wood, a realization that the ship is a tinderbox waiting for a single flame. The sound of the timber groaning under the pressure of the sea is a deep and grating creak, making the hold feel like the inside of a wooden throat. This part of the history is a realization that to destroy the fleet, Jin must become the fire that consumes the dark. He feels the steady pulse in the wrist and the constant pressure of the ceiling against his head, a feeling of total and grounded focus. At the center of the main deck, the group encounters a Mongol navigator, a man wearing a cloak made of seabird feathers and carrying a heavy, iron-tipped oar that he swings with a wild and bone-crushing reach. The fight is a story of the steel against the oar. The atmosphere is violent, bright, and swinging as the ship tilts sharply in the storm, sending barrels and crates sliding across the deck like heavy dice. This is the trial of the shifting gravity, where the atmosphere becomes one of sudden leaps and sharp impacts. Jin must move with a brutal and direct power, his katana cutting through the wet wood of the oar with a sound like stone hitting ice. The sound of the waves crashing over the deck is a deep and final roar, making the air feel like it is filled with the weight of the ocean. When the navigator finally falls into the dark water below, the atmosphere shifts to a heavy and searing stillness, a realization that the ship is now without a guide. Leaving the deck, the journey leads to the edge of the burning mast, where Jin ignites the signal that tells the Azamo archers to release their fire arrows. The atmosphere is vast, orange, and blinding, a realization that the entire bay is about to be turned into a lake of fire. This part of the history is a story of the floating inferno, where the atmosphere is one of extreme heat and howling wind. You see the way the red flames climb the white sails, looking like the fingers of a demon reaching for the moon. The air is hot and carries the taste of salt and burning oil. The sound of the wood cracking in the heat is a sharp and constant pop, signaling that the chain of the fleet has been broken by the fire of the Ghost. The walk through the shoreline aftermath is a story of the castaway. Jin stands on the black sand as the remains of the Mongol ships wash up at his feet, their charred timbers looking like the bones of a dead civilization. This is a moment of raw and metallic grief. The atmosphere is somber and still, a realization that the ocean has claimed the lives of 1,000 men in a single night. This part of the history is a story of the sunken record, where the victory of the Ghost is written in the debris of the tide. The sound of his boots on the wet gravel is a dull and respectful thud, making Jin feel solid and heavy in a world that is being washed clean by the salt. He moves with a sturdy and balanced power, his hand picking up a piece of a broken Mongol mask, realizing that the way of the Ghost is a path that leaves nothing but ashes and water in its wake. Deep in the heart of the beach camp at night, the final trial of the 11th part takes place as Jin and the fishermen sit by a low and smoky driftwood fire. The atmosphere is intimate, cold, and resolute, a realization that the victory at the bay has opened the way for the final push into the northern heartland. This is a story of the sovereignty of the shared breath, where they listen to the sound of the retreating tide and realize that the island is beginning to breathe again. The conversation is over. There is only the sound of the waves and the crackle of the salt-crusted wood. The sound of a distant seagull crying in the dark is a long and lonesome note, signaling that the true enemy is the silence that follows a great destruction. The experience at Azamo Bay ends with Jin standing at the edge of the Black Cliffs, looking toward the next region, the gray marshes of Otsuna. The black of the sand has led to a sovereignty of the cold mist. He carries the weight of the fleet's destruction and the silence of the sea. The atmosphere is one of quiet and hardened resolve, a realization that the path to the Ghost is now a path of the final reckoning. The focus would now shift to the Ghost's own past, as the history prepared to follow the trail of the shadow into a world of haunted forests family secrets, and the final gathering of the strength needed to face the Khan. The final legacy of the 11th part of the Ghost of Tsushima is a story of the strength in the crashing wave. You have seen the warrior walk through the fire and the salt to find the power within his own spirit. You have felt the sting of the spray and the weight of the wood. As the orange glow of the burning fleet fades into the evening shadows and the first gray mists of the marsh appear on the horizon, you feel a sense of simple and sacred purpose. The story of Jin Sakai finds its 11th and grounded resolution in the destruction of the fleet, leaving behind the world of the shore for a world of the mist, the shadow, and a journey that is reaching its peak. The journey moves away from the salt-stained shores of the bay and enters the Otsuna district, a region where the world is hidden beneath a heavy silver fog and the shadow of the ancient cedar. This is the path to the old Sakai hunting camp, a place tucked deep within the heart of a forest that feels as if it has been forgotten by the passage of time. The atmosphere here is cold, still, and haunted, and the ground beneath Jin's boots is a thick, springy layer of gray moss and decaying needles that swallows the sound of every step. The air tastes of wet bark, wild mint, and the cold, sharp scent of stone that never sees the sun. The sound of the world is a low and constant hum, the sound of the wind vibrating through the massive trunks of trees that are hundreds of years old, making the entire forest feel like a colossal, living cathedral. Jin leads himself through the narrow, vine-choked paths, his hand brushing against the rough bark of the cedars, realizing that in the deep woods of Otsuna, the danger is the memory of who you used to be before the war began. As Jin reaches the clearing of the hunting camp, the atmosphere shifts to one of quiet loneliness. He finds the old wooden shack leaning against a rocky outcrop, its roof covered in a thick blanket of green ferns, and its windows staring out like empty eyes. This is the era of the Whispering Ghost, where the atmosphere is one of dusty artifacts and lingering spirits. You see the way the light filters through the canopy in thin, ghostly beams, illuminating the old training post where Jin's father once taught him how to track the deer. This part of the history is a story of the hunter's legacy, a realization that the skills of the ghost were rooted in the lessons of the forest long before the Mongols arrived. The sound of a single leaf falling onto the wooden porch is a sharp and dry tap, a noise that echoes in the stillness of the camp. Jin moves with a sturdy and measured might, finding the old family bow rack empty, realizing that the house of Sakai is now a house of shadows. He feels the steady chill of the shade and the raw weight of the past in his chest, a feeling of total and grounded sadness. Deep within the ravine of the white mist, the atmosphere becomes cramped and blinding. Jin must track a group of Mongol wraiths, elite scouts who wear cloaks of gray fur and move through the fog with a silent and ghostly precision. This is the trial of the invisible foe, where the atmosphere becomes one of muffled heartbeats and sudden shadows. The warriors find that the fog is so thick it clings to their skin like a wet cloth, making it impossible to see the edge of the cliffs just a few feet away. The sound of the wind whistling through the narrow cracks in the rock is a high and haunting note, making the ravine feel like the inside of a flute. This part of the history is a realization that to defeat the wraiths, Jin must learn to hear the forest instead of seeing it. He feels the steady pulse in the ears and the constant pressure of the fog against his shoulders, a feeling of total and grounded vigilance. At the center of the ancient grove, the group encounters a Mongol stalker, a man who carries no heavy armor, but moves with a fast and animal-like agility, wielding a pair of short, curved blades that he strikes with a wicked and grating hiss. The fight is a story of the ghost against the shadow. The atmosphere is violent, muffled, and dark, as the stalker disappears into the mist, only to strike from the branches of the trees above. This is the trial of the third eye, where the atmosphere becomes one of sharp reflexes and sudden impact. Jin must move with a brutal and direct power, his sword clearing a circle in the fog with a sound like stone hitting ice. The sound of the stalker's blade hitting the wood of a tree is a sharp and splintering crack, making the air feel like it is filled with the shards of the forest. When the stalker finally falls among the gray moss, the atmosphere shifts to a heavy and misted stillness, a realization that the woods have claimed another soul. Leaving the grove, the journey leads to the edge of the Sakai overlook, where the entire district of Atsuna is visible beneath a blanket of white clouds. The atmosphere is vast, silent, and ancient, a realization that the island has seen many wars and will likely see many more. This part of the history is a story of the timeless watch, where the atmosphere is one of perspective and growing strength. You see the way the mountains rise out of the fog, like the fins of great stone fish, looking like a world that belongs to the gods. The air is freezing and carries the taste of pine and high altitudes. The sound of a distant eagle screaming is a long and piercing note, signaling that the spirit of the forest is a force that cannot be conquered by iron. The walk through the path of the falling water is a story of the purified mind. Jin stands beneath a small, cold waterfall to wash the blood of the wraiths from his armor. This is a moment of raw and physical clarity. The atmosphere is somber and still, a realization that the ghost is a creature born of both the light of the waterfall and the dark of the woods. This part of the history is a story of the balanced blade, where the heritage of the samurai meets the necessity of the shadow. The sound of the water hitting the stones is a deep and constant roar, making Jin feel solid and heavy in a world that is constantly moving. He moves with a sturdy and balanced power, his hand checking the edge of his blade, realizing that the way of the ghost is the only way to honor the memory of the men who hunted these woods before him. Deep in the heart of the old cabin at night, the final trial of the 12th part takes place as Jin sits by a small and crackling fire made of cedar wood. The atmosphere is intimate, warm, and resolute, a realization that he has finally made peace with the ghosts of his childhood. This is a story of the sovereignty of the shared flame, where he listens to the sound of the forest breathing outside and realizes that he is no longer afraid of the dark. The conversation is over. There is only the sound of the wood popping and the wind in the chimney. The sound of a distant Mongol horn from the valley below is a low and constant throb, signaling that the true enemy is now waiting for him in the final fortress. The experience at Atsuna ends with Jin standing at the edge of the forest path, looking toward the next region, the black cliffs of Jigaku. The gray of the moss has led to a sovereignty of the eternal winter. He carries the weight of the father's hunting knife and the silence of the ancient trees. The atmosphere is one of quiet and hardened resolve, a realization that the path to the ghost is now a path of the final mountain. The focus would now shift to the gathering of the tribes, as the history prepared to follow the trail of the ice into a world of frozen peaks, burning oil, and the final army that will march on the Khan. The final legacy of the 12th part of the Ghost of Tsushima is a story of the strength in the silent woods. You have seen the warrior walk through the fog and the memory to find the anchor within his own spirit. You have felt the sting of the cold and the weight of the past. As the gray glow of the forest fades into the evening shadows and the first white peaks of the north appear on the horizon, you feel a sense of simple and sacred purpose. The story of Jin Sakai finds its 12th and grounded resolution in the reclaiming of the legacy, leaving behind the world of the child for a world of the legend, the ghost, and a journey that is entering the final winter. The journey moves away from the silver fog of the woods and climbs into the frozen heights of Jigaku, a region where the world is buried under miles of unbroken ice and the howl of a never-ending blizzard. This is the final staging ground, the place where the path to the ghost reaches its coldest and most dangerous peak. The atmosphere here is freezing, white, and violent, and the ground beneath Jin's boots is a sheet of hard, blue ice and deep, powdery snow that makes every step a struggle against the gravity of the mountain. The air tastes of frozen iron, dry frost, and the sharp, thin scent of the clouds themselves. The sound of the world is a constant and high-pitched scream, the sound of the wind tearing through the jagged stone peaks, making the entire region feel like a colossal, white fortress built by the gods. Jin leads his horse through the blinding whiteout, his hand pulling the fur of his collar over his face to keep his breath from turning into ice, realizing that in the winter of Jigaku, the danger is the exhaustion that makes you want to lie down in the snow and never get up. As Jin reaches the temple ruins of Jigaku, the atmosphere shifts to one of desperate survival. He finds his allies, Yuna, Ishikawa, Norio, and Masako, huddled around small, flickering fires inside the broken stone walls of the sanctuary. This is the era of the final gathering, where the atmosphere is one of shared shivering and hardened will. You see the way the firelight reflects off the icicles that have grown over the statues of the Buddhas, looking like the temple is weeping frozen tears. This part of the history is a story of the Winter Army, a realization that the ghost has brought together everyone who has lost everything, turning their grief into the fuel for the final fire. The sound of a beam cracking under the weight of the snow is a sharp and echoing snap, a noise that reminds the warriors that even the stone is tired of the war. Jin moves with a sturdy and measured might, checking on the wounded and sharing the last of the dried fish, feeling the steady bite of the frost and the raw weight of the leadership on his shoulders, a feeling of total and grounded determination. Deep within the frozen pass of the Iron Mountain, the atmosphere becomes confined and lethal. Jin must clear a path through the Mongol juggernauts, massive soldiers encased in layers of steel and fur, who carry shields as thick as tree trunks and move with a slow and crushing momentum. This is the trial of the unstoppable wall, where the atmosphere becomes one of heavy impacts and muffled steel. The warriors find that the air is so cold it burns the lungs with every breath, a realization that the mountain is helping the enemy by stealing the strength of the defenders. The sound of the juggernaut's mace hitting the frozen earth is a deep and bone-shaking thud, making the pass feel like the inside of a crashing glacier. This part of the history is a realization that to break the line, Jin must strike the weakness of the joint. He feels the steady pulse in the temples and the constant pressure of the wind against his shield, a feeling of total and grounded endurance. At the center of the Blizzard Bridge, the group encounters a Mongol siege captain, a man who carries a heavy black powder cannon that he fires with a blinding and earth-shattering boom. The fight is a story of the steel against the thunder. The atmosphere is violent, white, and explosive, as the bridge is obscured by clouds of gray smoke and flying snow, making it impossible to see where the stone ends and the sky begins. This is the trial of the invisible impact, where the atmosphere becomes one of sudden heat and sharp reflexes. Jin must move with a brutal and direct power, his katana cutting through the freezing air to find the captain before the next shot can be fired. The sound of the cannonball hitting the cliffside is a sharp and splintering crack, making the air feel like it is filled with the shards of the mountain. When the captain finally falls into the white abyss below, the atmosphere shifts to a heavy and howling stillness, a realization that the path to the Khan's final fortress is now clear. Leaving the bridge, the journey leads to the Jigaku lighthouse, where Jin ignites the great signal fire to call the remaining rebels of the island to the north. The atmosphere is vast, orange, and defiant, a realization that the fire of the ghost can be seen even through the thickest blizzard. This part of the history is a story of the beacon of the north, where the atmosphere is one of vengeful hope and rising heat. You see the way the red flames dance against the white snow, looking like a blooming flower in the middle of a desert of ice. The air is warm for a moment and carries the taste of burning oil and cedar. The sound of the fire roaring in the wind is a deep and harmonic note, signaling that the spirit of the resistance is a flame that cannot be extinguished by the winter. The walk through the Hall of the Fallen is a story of the final roll call. Lord Shimura arrives with the last of the shogun's samurai, their banners tattered, but their swords bright. This is a moment of raw and uncomfortable unity. The atmosphere is somber and still, a realization that while they fight for the same island, they no longer fight for the same code. This part of the history is a story of the two armies, where the tradition of the sun meets the necessity of the shadow for the last time. The sound of their boots on the frozen stone is a sharp and respectful click, making Jin feel solid and heavy in a world that is becoming a ghost of itself. He moves with a sturdy and balanced power, his hand gripping the hilt of his sword, realizing that the way of the ghost has provided the army, but the price is the love of his only family. Deep in the heart of the temple camp at night, the final trial of the 13th part takes place as the warriors prepare their weapons for the march on Port Izumi. The atmosphere is intimate, cold, and resolute, a realization that many of them will not see the next sunset. This is a story of the sovereignty of the last meal, where they share a simple bowl of rice and talk about the farms they want to return to and the families they want to see again. The conversation is a moment of grounded humanity, as they realize that the winter is not just their enemy, but their witness. The sound of a single flute playing a song of home is a high and lonely note, signaling that the true enemy is the fear that their sacrifice will be forgotten. The experience at Jigaku ends with Jin standing at the edge of the temple balcony, looking toward the dark horizon where the Khan's capital sits. The white of the snow has led to a sovereignty of the black iron. He carries the weight of the hopes of an island and the silence of the winter. The atmosphere is one of quiet and hardened resolve, a realization that the path to the ghost is now a path of the final storm. The focus would now shift to the siege of Port Izumi, as the history prepared to follow the trail of the smoke into a world of massive ships, poisoned air, and the final face-to-face confrontation with the Khan. The final legacy of the 13th part of the Ghost of Tsushima is a story of the strength in the frozen will. You have seen the warrior walk through the blizzard and the blood to find the fire within his own spirit. You have felt the sting of the ice and the weight of the command. As the white glow of the mountain fades into the evening shadows and the first black smoke of the port appears on the horizon, you feel a sense of simple and sacred purpose. The story of Jin Sakai finds its 13th and grounded resolution in the gathering of the storm, leaving behind the world of the survivor for a world of the conqueror, the ghost, and a journey that is reaching its end. The journey leaves the frozen heights of the mountains and descends into the final darkness of Port Izumi, a region where the world is made of black iron, choking smoke, and the smell of a dying sea. This is the end of the road, the place where the Mongol invasion has built its final nest. The atmosphere here is hot, suffocating, and lethal, and the ground beneath Jin's boots is a floor of scorched wood and wet harbor stones that are covered in a layer of black soot. The air tastes of burning pitch, poisoned vapors, and the sharp, metallic tang of blood that has been baked into the earth. The sound of the world is a constant and heavy thump, the sound of the Mongol war machines, and the crashing of the waves against the hulls of the ships, making the entire port feel like a colossal iron heart that is beating out the final seconds of the war. Jin leads his team of specialists through the burning outskirts, his hand feeling the heat of his father's sword, realizing that in Port Izumi, the danger is the realization that to win, he must burn everything he ever loved. As Jin reaches the gates of the Khan's manor, the atmosphere shifts to one of industrial terror. He finds that the Mongols have prepared thousands of jars of the ghost's own poison, ready to be shipped to the mainland to destroy the shogun's armies. This is the era of the poison tide, where the atmosphere is one of chemical haze and desperate speed. You see the way the yellow gas leaks from the broken vats, turning the air into a blur of sickness and shadows. This part of the history is a story of the mirror's edge, a realization that the ghost has taught the enemy how to be a monster. The sound of the steam hissing from the pipes is a sharp and piercing shriek, a noise that cuts through the roar of the fire. Jin moves with a sturdy and measured might, his eyes fixed on the high balcony where the Khan watches the destruction, feeling the searing heat on the face and the steady grit of ash in his lungs, a feeling of total and grounded reckoning. Deep within the manor courtyard, the atmosphere becomes cramped and violent. Jin must fight through the Khan's personal guard, men who carry flaming spears and move with a fast and lethal precision. This is the trial of the burning path, where the atmosphere becomes one of rapid impacts and muffled steel. The warriors find that the courtyard is a maze of silk banners and wooden screens that are all on fire, making it impossible to see the enemy until they are a foot away. The sound of the wood cracking in the heat is a sharp and constant pop, making the courtyard feel like the inside of a furnace. This part of the history is a realization that to reach the Khan, Jin must become the fire himself. He feels the steady pulse in the wrist and the constant pressure of the smoke against his chest, a feeling of total and grounded resolve. At the center of the great hall, Jin finally encounters Cotton Khan, a man twice his size, wearing golden armor and carrying a massive polearm that he swings with a wild and bone-crushing power. The fight is a story of the ghost against the conqueror. The atmosphere is violent, bright, and final, as the two men clash amidst the falling debris of the manor. This is the trial of the final strike, where the atmosphere becomes one of high stakes and total focus. Jin moves with a brutal and direct efficiency, his sword finding the gaps in the Khan's heavy plate with a sound like stone hitting iron. The sound of the Khan's laughter is a deep and rasping growl, making the air feel like it is filled with the weight of history. When the fight spills out onto the deck of the Khan's flagship, the atmosphere shifts to a heavy and salty stillness, a realization that only one of them will see the dawn. Leaving the deck after the final blow, the journey leads to the edge of the burning port as the Mongol fleet begins to sink into the dark water. The atmosphere is vast, orange, and silent, a realization that the invasion has finally been broken. This part of the history is a story of the victory in the ashes, where the atmosphere is one of drained relief and hollow peace. You see the way the red light of the fire reflects in the water, looking like a second sun rising from the bottom of the sea. The air is warm and carries the taste of salt and finality. The sound of the waves hitting the shore is a soft and constant rhythm, signaling that the spirit of Tsushima has been returned to the people, but at a price that cannot be measured. The walk through the ruins of Izumi is a story of the ghost's burden. Jin stands among the survivors, his armor broken and his face covered in the soot of the battle. This is a moment of raw and existential grief. The atmosphere is somber and still, a realization that while he is a hero to the common man, he is a criminal to his own kin. This part of the history is a story of the shattered mask, where the identity of the samurai is gone forever. The sound of his boots on the wet stones is a sharp and respectful click, making Jin feel solid and heavy in a world that is ready to rebuild. He moves with a sturdy and balanced power, his hand touching the hilt of his sword, realizing that the way of the ghost has saved the island, but it has left him with nothing but the shadow. Deep in the heart of the wreckage at night, the final trial of the 14th part takes place as Jin watches the last of the Mongol ships disappear beneath the waves. The atmosphere is intimate, cold, and final, a realization that the external war is over, but the internal war is about to begin. This is a story of the sovereignty of the quiet ending, where he realizes that the island of Tsushima is free, but he is now a man without a home. The conversation is over. There is only the sound of the wind and the smell of the sea. The sound of a distant temple bell from the hills is a long and harmonic note, signaling that the true enemy was never just the Khan, but the change that comes with time. The experience at Port Izumi ends with Jin standing at the edge of the docks, looking toward the next and final destination, the Omi dueling ground. The black of the iron has led to a sovereignty of the red leaves. He carries the weight of the Khan's death and the silence of the savior. The atmosphere is one of quiet and hardened resolve, a realization that the path to the ghost is now a path of the final duel. The focus would now shift to the end of the clan, as the history prepared to follow the trail of the maple back to the beginning, to face Lord Shimura in the battle that will decide the fate of the ghost forever. The final legacy of the 14th part of the Ghost of Tsushima is a story of the strength in the ultimate sacrifice. You have seen the warrior walk through the fire and the poison to find the end within his own spirit. You have felt the sting of the heat and the weight of the crown. As the orange glow of the burning port fades into the evening shadows and the first red leaves of the dueling ground appear on the horizon, you feel a sense of simple and sacred purpose. the story of Jin Sakai finds its 14th and grounded resolution in the death of the Khan, leaving behind the world of the war for a world of the duel, the family, and a journey that is reaching its final hour. The journey returns to where it all began, at the Omi dueling ground, a place where the world is framed by the bright crimson of the maple and the white grave of the ancestors. This is the end of the legend, the region of the final blade and the heavy heart, where the air is perfectly still, and the ground is a soft, thick carpet of red leaves that look like a field of spilled blood. This part of the history is a story of the family's end, a realization that the war for the island is over, but the war for the soul must be finished between a father and a son. The atmosphere here is cold, sacred, and silent, and the ground beneath Jin's boots is a firm, ancient earth that has held the weight of the Sakai clan for centuries. The air tastes of mountain rain, old stone, and the sharp, electric scent of unsheathed steel. The sound of the world is a low and constant sigh, the sound of the wind moving through the red branches like a tired breath, making the entire clearing feel like a colossal, natural altar. Jin leads himself toward the center of the field, his hand resting on the hilt of the sword he has used to kill 1,000 men, realizing that in Omi, the danger is the love that makes the blade heavy. As Jin reaches the center of the circle, the atmosphere shifts to one of regal sorrow. He finds Lord Shimura standing by the family graves, his armor polished and his face set in a mask of stone and duty. This is the era of the final law, where the atmosphere is one of inevitable tragedy and absolute grace. You see the way the sunlight catches the falling leaves, making them look like sparks of fire drifting through the air. This part of the history is a story of the shogun's command, a realization that the ghost has become too powerful to be allowed to live in a world of laws. The sound of the wind through the tall grass is a sharp and hissing chord, a noise that marks the end of the conversation. Jin moves with a sturdy and measured might, his eyes fixed on the man who raised him, feeling the steady ache in the chest and the raw weight of the armor against his skin, a feeling of total and grounded sadness. Deep within the circle of the red maples, the atmosphere becomes confined and absolute. Jin and Shimura draw their blades at the same moment, the sound of the steel ringing out like a high and pure note that echoes off the mountainside. This is the trial of the blood bond, where the atmosphere becomes one of slow breaths and sudden lightning. The warriors find that the world outside the circle has disappeared, leaving only the two of them and the weight of their choices. The sound of the swords clashing is a sharp and grating snap, making the clearing feel like the inside of a cracking diamond. This part of the history is a realization that to save the future, the past must be put to rest. He feels the steady pulse in the wrist and the constant pressure of the honor against his mind, a feeling of total and grounded focus. At the center of the dueling ground, the fight reaches its peak, a story of the ghost against the samurai. The atmosphere is violent, bright, and graceful, as the two masters of the blade move in a dance that has been practiced for 20 years. This is the trial of the perfect strike, where the atmosphere becomes one of extreme precision and muffled cries. Jin must move with a brutal and direct power, his katana cutting through the air with a sound like silk tearing as he parries the strikes of his uncle. The sound of the blood hitting the red leaves is a soft and rhythmic patter, making the air feel like it is filled with the weight of a life. When the final blow is struck and Shimura falls to his knees, the atmosphere shifts to a heavy and misted stillness, a realization that the Sakai clan has reached its final page. Leaving the circle of the duel, the journey leads to the edge of the family lake, where Jin stands alone as the sun sets for the last time on his old life. The atmosphere is vast, gold, and empty, a realization that he is now the ghost forever, a man without a name, a home, or a family. This part of the history is a story of the eternal shadow, where the atmosphere is one of lonely peace and hardened freedom. You see the way the red sun reflects in the water, looking like a gate that has been closed behind him. The air is cold and carries the taste of salt and old memories. The sound of the wind through the reeds is a soft and constant whisper, signaling that the spirit of the ghost is now the only thing that protects the island. The walk through the abandoned estate is a story of the faded legacy. Jin walks through the empty halls where he once played as a child, his footsteps echoing on the wooden floors like the sound of a closing book. This is a moment of raw and existential finality. The atmosphere is somber and still, a realization that the victory over the Mongols was won by destroying the person he used to be. This part of the history is a story of the White Shroud, where the glory of the war meets the silence of the aftermath. The sound of the gate locking behind him is a deep and final thud, making Jin feel solid and heavy in a world that no longer recognizes him. He moves with a sturdy and balanced power, his hand clutching his mask as he disappears into the trees, realizing that the way of the ghost is a journey that never truly ends. Deep in the heart of the hidden hut in the woods at night, the final trial of the 15th part takes place as Jin sits by a small and secret fire. The atmosphere is intimate, cold, and resolute, a realization that he will spend the rest of his days in the shadows, watching over the people of Tsushima from the dark. This is a story of the sovereignty of the Eternal Watch, where he listens to the sound of the island breathing and realizes that the peace he bought was worth the price of his soul. The conversation is over. There is only the sound of the crackling wood and the distant ocean. The sound of a single owl calling in the dark is a long and lonesome note, signaling that the true enemy is now only the memory of the light. The experience of the Ghost of Tsushima ends with Jin standing on a high cliff overlooking the sea, his cape fluttering in the wind like the wings of a great black bird. The red of the maple has led to a sovereignty of the endless night. He carries the weight of the fallen uncle and the silence of the savior. The atmosphere is one of quiet and hardened peace, a realization that his journey is no longer about a name, but about a promise. The focus has now shifted from the war of the world to the peace of the shadow, as the history finds its final and grounded resolution in the closing of the legend. The final legacy of the 15 parts of the Ghost of Tsushima is a story of the strength in the lonely heart. You have seen the warrior walk through the fire, the snow, and the blood to find the purpose within his own spirit. You have felt the sting of the loss and the weight of the mask. As the golden glow of the island fades into the permanent dark, and the stars appear in the sky like the eyes of the ancestors, you feel a sense of simple and sacred purpose. The story of Jin Sakai is finished, leaving behind the world of men for a world of silence, shadow, and a journey that will continue in the dark for all the years to come.